Welcome to QandA. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, the Shadow Minister for Communications, Malcolm Turnbull, author and social activist Eva Cox, the US Ambassador to Australia, Jeff Bleish, Egyptian novelist and commentator Adaf Souef, and the Foreign Minister, Bob Carr. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Well, Q&A is live from at 9:35 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. It's simulcast on News 24 and News Radio. You can go to our website to send a question or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag that just appeared on your screen. Our next question tonight comes from Mary Nicola.
My question is to the US Ambassador. Hopefully you can answer it, but to me and 15 million Coptic Orthodox people in Egypt. With high unemployment and a crippled economy, why has the Obama administration chosen as a priority to fund through American tax dollars the delivery of US-made weapons, F-16s, tanks and aircraft to the radical Muslim Brotherhood government of Egypt, especially when President Morsi has been cited saying, boycott all products made by American enemies, and then Jews are descendants of pigs and apes?
Before I bring the ambassador in, I'd like to hear... We do have an Egyptian here, so I would like to start and hear from Adaf on this question.
But the question was about why the American government chose to send F-16s to President Mubarak, President Morsi. That's a Freudian slip.
Well, I mean, I suppose the core of the question is whether or not that's a good idea. As an Egyptian, what do you think?
I think it's a terrible idea, an absolutely awful idea. And I beyond that, 2 days ago, the news broke that the Morsi administration has ordered a further 140,000 gas canisters, again from their friends in the United States. That's tear gas canisters, which are due to be delivered in April for when we go into elections. This is a useful election tool. And in fact, they've even, it becomes more interesting, they have issues with the logistics of their being delivered. And so the Ministry of the Interior in Egypt has asked the military in Egypt to bring them over on military planes. And the company that is importing them, which is G4S Security, interestingly enough, will pay for the transport. So many, many questions here. Why is the government-to-government deal being mediated through a private company? Why is the military going to carry these tons of tear gas to Egypt? Why is the government importing all this tear gas just in time for the elections? And why is it spending $2.5 million on new tear gas at a point when it's telling us that we are so hard up that people should take down their intake of bread from 5 to 3 units of bread per day? So clearly, it's a terrible idea.
Jeff Bleish.
You know, Egypt is going through a very difficult period right now, coming out of the Mubarak regime and the revolution, and now trying to restore its economy. And they have not been operating as a democracy. Their economy was in terrible shape before this, and then with the Arab Spring, there was a real fall-off in the economy, tourism, everything else fell off. And so they're in a worse position than they were in before. The U.S. has been trying to allow the people of Egypt to determine their own leadership. At the same time, we've been trying to make sure that the economy stays stable enough that it doesn't descend into chaos. We're providing humanitarian assistance into Egypt. And we have always, and I can't speak to the specifics of either your question or the allegations that Adaf has raised, but what I can say is that they are also vulnerable to people coming in from outside groups, really dangerous extremist groups, terrorist groups, and they have to be in a position where they can defend themselves. You can't completely defang their military. You can't completely defang their military.
Well, I mean, but what you're really doing is basically honouring a commitment to the previous dictator to sell 16, or give them, in fact, 16 F-16s, 200 Abrams tanks. I mean, that's quite a substantial military assistance.
Well, you know, we are assisting them not in taking action against their own people. We're trying to protect them against outside invading forces which could And every country needs to have the ability to protect themselves.
Yeah, can we just shift this here? I've raised with Hillary Clinton and with others in Washington the issue of protecting minorities, the Western world taking an interest in protecting the minorities in the Middle East. The question comes from a woman who identified herself as someone with a Coptic background. Perhaps 10% of the population of Egypt is Coptic, and they feel very, very nervous at the present time. In September in Egypt, I was able to ask President Morsi whether, on behalf of all the Copts I know in Australia, this splendid community, whether he could give me guarantees I could take back that he would protect them. And he said, I don't want to be head of a theocratic state or a military state. I want to be head of a civil state. I want to be president for all the Egyptians. And I think the Western world's got a stake in seeing that minorities that have lived in the Middle East for 2,000 years, the Christians, but others as well, the Kurds, for example, let alone the small Jewish populations that have survived in Arab countries, should, during this tumultuous period of Sunni revolution, be protected. We've got an interest in protecting the minorities of the Middle East so that we can preserve something of that wonderful overlap of cultures, that cultural diversity that was for a long time the heritage of Middle Eastern life.
Bob, our questioner has a hand up. I'll just go back to you. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, just back to the US ambassador and to Bob Carr. The only enemy Egypt is fighting at this point is the people itself. US-made bullets are in the bodies of the Egyptian people themselves, whether they are Muslim or Coptic Orthodox, because they're all against the tyranny of the current President Mohamed Morsi. So if you think that we're going to be invaded by Iran or any other of our Arab neighbours, you're sorely mistaken, because you'll find plenty of bodies with US-made weapons at this point. And to Bob Carr, I highly encourage you to continue that pressure on President Mohamed Morsi, because at this point the next elections for the Parliament is during our Holy Week of Lent, and no Coptic will be able to actually go to those elections.
Yeah, can I just assure you that the first phone call I made to an Australian ambassador after I was designated, not even sworn in as Foreign Minister of Australia, was to Ralph King, our ambassador in Cairo, to ask him to visit the Coptic churches and the monasteries and to call on the acting Pope to give me a report on the safety of this great community. I'll be at the Coptic church in Sydney on Sunday. Their welfare is very close to my heart, and Australia will fight hard to see that their anxieties aren't increased as this Sunni revolution plays itself out.
Okay, I'm just going to go to a tweet that's just come in. It's from Jacob Waba. Egypt has had one revolution. There's another one coming. What do you say to that, Arif?
I think it's very likely. I just want to say to Neri that, in fact, they have, after Twitter and the media sort of wiped the floor with President Morsi, they've changed the election date to avoid Palm Sunday. But the blindness which was there to make them put the election date there in the first place was remarkable. I think that we need to be very careful when we look to Western powers and say, could you protect minorities? Because this is traditionally how colonialism and imperialism have come into our countries. And I think, thank you. And I think that this divisiveness, where they come in to protect the Christians or they come in to protect women, I think this divisiveness is, we are beyond that now, and that is very, very clear. And I think that one of the amazing things about the revolution, and that we've seen since the revolution, has been the extent to which society, and particularly within the revolution, has moved to assert Egyptian unity and the absence of that kind of division. I mean, people actually, like Muslims going to church to pray with the Christians, like Mass and prayers being celebrated together in Tahrir and so on. This is all really important. Foreign intervention can only damage that, and it is totally not a good thing. And you're completely right that American bullets and American arms are being used to kill Egyptians indiscriminately.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring the ambassador back for a quick comment on that, and I want to hear from our other panelists as well, quickly.
No, again, we're using every one of the tools that we have available to us to assist the Egyptian people to choose their own leaders and to get those leaders to respect human rights. That's what all of our efforts are geared towards. And there are diplomatic efforts behind the scenes. There are humanitarian efforts. There's the use of economic incentives and humanitarian incentives.
Yeah, Tony, I think this is a point worth making. When I talk about protecting minorities in the Middle East, I don't mean any crude intervention, but I do mean when we sit down to talk to the head of an Arab country, when we get past talking about selling them patrol boats or working towards a Middle East peace process or whatever, there is always an agenda item which is about this, which is about human rights. A gentle, persuasive representation that they should protect their minorities because those minorities are part of the patchwork of the Australian community, and it is an Australian interest. It's an Australian interest to see that they're protected in these countries. Not just the Copts in Egypt, but
all right, but I
Kurds
mean,
throughout the Middle East.
I mean, I'd like to hear from our other panellists, so I won't sort of let this go for too long. But I mean, do you worry about the fact that our key ally is providing fighter jets, tanks?
That's a matter of the bilateral relationship between the United States and Egypt.
Okay. Yes, Malcolm Turnbull.
Well, I agree with Bob's enlightened remarks, and I think the single most important thing that we should be demanding and indeed providing encouragement for is the rule of law. Unless you have the rule of law, which means that the majority can't wipe out the minority, then democracy just becomes majoritarian tyranny. The challenge that the Copts have in Egypt is frightening. That is an existential threat, absolutely, as indeed is the position potentially faced by the Alawi in Syria, and indeed the Christians in Syria as well, not to speak of the Shia. I mean, the if democracy means a Sunni majority can wipe out the minorities, then that is not what we can accept as a democracy. But you know, we need very, very cool heads, and we need to be calm about it. I mean, Bob has been very calm tonight, although last October, Bob, on the ABC, you called for Bashar al-Assad to be assassinated.
No, that's not right. I mean, that's plain silly. That's not right.
Well, you did on Four Corners.
I remember precisely what I said, and the tape will confirm it. I was asked to speculate how the regime might end. I was asked to speculate how the regime might end the week after the Minister for Defence had been assassinated. And I pointed out that it could come with the shearing off of part of the yellow-white support base, and that could be accompanied by an assassination. Malcolm, that is very, very different from calling for an assassination.
But seriously,
different.
But Bob, seriously, all of us were anxious about if you did have a hit list, who would be on it? Whether, given the...
Malcolm, you would not be on it because you're my favourite Liberal leader.
Yeah, but what... I would think, having regard to the turmoil in the Labor Party, one could be concerned about some other domestic targets.
Okay.
I've got no idea what you're talking about.
Can I just raise?
Yeah, go ahead, quickly. Yes, you can.
Just very briefly, I mean, it was one of the comments that the ambassador made, and your intervention in that is that the arms provisions of the American things, the whole arms industry in America and its tie-in within the points that were being made about the sort of the sales and things like that, it doesn't help democracy to provide the sorts of weapons that can be used against civilians. It doesn't, you know, as people say, it's not a threat. So maybe the American arms industry ought to be sort of pulled back when these things are happening, so at least they don't have the sort of weaponry that can be used against civilian populations. And I think the Americans are far too ready to sell their arms to anybody who'll buy them, regardless of their politics.
All right. You want to respond to that?
No, you know, every single foreign military sale goes through an elaborate process to make sure that those sorts of things are assessed in advance.
You do a very bad process well, in that case, judging by some of the results of some of your arms sales.
And look, it's to be assessed in advance so that you make sure that, you know, if people are purchasing these, it's for their legitimate self-defense. Every country has to be able to defend itself. Australia has F-16s, they have F-18s, they have a whole variety of things. It's not because they want to turn it on their civilian population.
No, well, we're not talking about that. No, that's a totally absurd argument. I think the Americans have got a very long record of providing armaments, of bringing things in,
of using things like drones, of doing various things. I mean, have a look at some of the things you're doing around Pakistan and Afghanistan. You are not sort of pure people who sit there thinking for every gun, I wonder who's they're going to shoot it. So don't come that one on me, please.
Well, you know when you're on Q&A.